Dmitriy is a consultant at Unchained Value. Previously, he was a Global Procurement Director at SLB and Baker Hughes, where he utilized his strong desire for learning and teaching, problem solving, and project management skills to elevate supplier management practice. Dmitriy has a passion for sustainability, innovation, and effective leadership. He started his career as a field engineer, and in the past 20 years has held multiple roles in operation and supply chain management in North America. So he holds a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Moscow and a certificate in sustainable supply chain from the University of Cambridge. So Dmitriy has so many like registered, instructors and certifications, CSCP, CTSC, so climate Fresk facilitator, and project management certificate by PMI. Dmitriy is based here in the Greater Houston area, and he's a father of 2 kids, passionate and active fitness promoter. Thank you, Dmitriy, for speaking today. And yeah, we're very excited for this one. So.
All right. I guess thank you, Anna, for introduction and opportunity to speak. So let's do. Let me share the screens. And you just took care of one of my slides, the introduction. So thank you. And I think you need to stop sharing for me to start.
Sorry, it was me. I needed to do
There
it
you go.
as the admin. There you go.
All right. And so you guys can see the screen properly, right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, perfect. And I just need a second because I can't see a chat. I do want to see it. There we go. This is me presenting here, and if I look this way, this is the chat. So don't think I'm just looking somewhere else. This is me trying to stay engaged. And on that topic, I have a lot of slides. When Johanna and I discussed, she gave me a full hour time to present the topic. I think I have a little bit less. I'll probably need to speed up through some sections, but I have pretty comprehensive review of supplier management. We come up with a cool title, and we'll go from a strategy around why you would need it, and go through the execution, some key elements, and a lot of aspects that will be covered, and not all, by the way. So I have a slide that shows how many elements supplier management is actually touching. So I'm glad, I want to thank everyone for joining. It's been a topic for me for the last few years of my career, and I'm glad, to have opportunity to share it. I guess I will skip this introduction, maybe just a reminder. So I'm a part of the Unchained Value team, and Katie, if you missed the Katie introduction from Katie earlier, we are a niche focused on supply chain transformation and education, and we provide bespoke solution to drive value, customer empowerment, and independence. And with that, so let me move to our agenda. So I will start with a relatively easy agenda. First, so we'll get through the why supplier management matters. Then we get into some concepts, some definitions. Then there'll be a big section around the execution, so the tools, the people, the integration, and then towards the end, we'll go towards, how do you assess, where do you start, how do you scale the program, and then we'll close with the summary. Again, this has been a world for me, for the last 5 years. I can speak on this topic, for hours. But it would be more beneficial if you guys get engaged as well. I have a number of slides where I'll be asking, your comments. Throughout the presentation, I'll be trying to share as many relevant personal experience and stories, from my past career. And to make it a little bit more flavor and not just the theory. And speaking of the theory, I think most of you guys have been part of ASCM for quite some time, and you're familiar. The topic is covered a little bit through CSCP, a little bit through CTSC, and then there's two certificate programs that ASCM has. One is on supply relationship management, and there's a procurement certificate, and the topic is covered quite extensively and what ASCM has to offer. And I will try to give you a summary in under 1 hour on a topic. So we'll start with what I mentioned. So please get your keyboard ready, and if you want to go off mute and speak, this would be a good opportunity as well. But why supplier management? And while you getting your thoughts ready and hopefully typing comments, I will just mention a few words. Supplier management, when you think about it, you make it real for everyday life. Every one of us, I'm sure you have a bank that you're using. I'm sure you have a hair stylist that you go to. And any provider in the personal life is technically a supplier to you. And how do you manage the relationship, or you don't? Maybe it's a transactional supplier. I'm sure every one of you are, whether you've been in procurement or haven't been in procurement, in personal life, you have suppliers that help manage your life. And how do you do it? Obviously, supplier management here is more at a corporate level, but I just wanted to mention a few comments, to relate that information. It's not only corporate, and it's in life as well. Whether you have maybe you have a personal fitness instructor in the gym, and there's many other potential, elements, people or companies that help make our life easier. You guys are a quiet group. I didn't see anything in the chat. All right. I hope there'll be a couple more points, so hopefully you guys will be a little bit more active. So why supplier management? So I've broken down into 4 different ideas here. The complexity, the supply chains are increasingly global and complex, and I think last few months, last few years show the complexity and the geopolitical risk, some of the logistical challenges. COVID is getting further and further away, but I think the memories of COVID and the disruptions that started are still there. ESG compliance, we talked earlier about sustainability and some of the regulatory framework around ESG. Supplier dependencies are rising, especially with the recent tariff increase story. I'm sure everyone heard the news about, I'm relying on the supplier in China, and with the increased tariff, what I do is going to impact our business. So dependencies on the suppliers on the rise. And if you are being part of global procurement and large or smaller corporation, you would probably feel the expectations are rising. Management wants reduce cost, increase service level, reduce risk, and all at once. Good luck on getting all of that. And what we find is, managing supplier at the tactical level, it works, at some point, but you have to elevate your game and really treat suppliers and the whole program a little bit more strategically. All right. If you don't do it, right? What happens if you don't do it? Well, I've listed a number of things here things that can go wrong, from quality issues that lead to rework and waste of time and, dissatisfaction, whether it's, internal impact, internal production, potentially can leak and impact the customer, impact the revenue, impact your reputation, poor delivery performance that, again, this will impact your P&L, top line, bottom line. This could also cause some reputational damage and fine. And I have some couple examples later in my speech for that. And there's a little bit in lost value. If you think about the value of finding the supplier, when you made a decision on buy versus make versus buy, you made that decision, and you decide to go buy. Things change, situation change, your business needs change, supplier change, the environment on the market changes as well. So if you don't stay close with your suppliers, you might lose potential value and missed improvement opportunities. So what is the value of doing it right? And this is a pretty complex slide, probably one of the key slides for me that I've been using in the last few years to explain the value from supplier management. And I've ranked them in a way, if I would join the organization and I have suppliers to manage, I would start with some foundational elements, right? And that comes with the supplier. It's a supplier that you already had, so most likely have agreement. There's a unit price, or they're part of a project cost. There should be a element of commercial agreement where everyone is kind of aware on what the services cost. And then this is more practical topic, supplier master data. I think anyone can make a deal with supplier. We've seen, I think people here on the call is mostly on the supply chain. Anyone, even operations, can make a deal with supplier, and then later, a few months down the road, you can find out that we forgot to add them to the ERP, and we're actually not paying them. Right. So to me, it's a little bit, it's a foundational element. A supplier in the system, what price you buy, and then you move to risk management. All right. Is supplier qualified? Do they have the capacity? And how they've been performing? Do you have contingency? Have you had any non-conformances with that supplier? So those are, that's the next element, the value element on the risk management. And there's some elements that you do in the entry when supplier enters your pool of suppliers, and then there's also risk management as you go through, the operations, and there's also some proactive risk management you can do, especially using the technology and AI nowadays. So now supplier is there, supplier is working. How supplier is working? This is where performance management comes in. So you want to have to know, why you're using the suppliers, what are the metrics for the supplier, and then if supplier is not performing up to the metrics, so you wanna focus on improving their performance. And if supplier is performing to your expectations, then you face with the question: should you develop the supplier even more, potentially into other areas, because that's a good supplier and performing into expectations. Contract management, things that we've discussed, from pricing to risk management to KPIs, all of that should be in a contract, should be properly documented. And so we'll touch a little bit on that. And then the last value element is the collaboration. It's hard to do collaboration with all of your suppliers, but this will probably apply to your top strategic suppliers, and this is where you do your quarterly business review, your annual business review. You embark on an innovation journey, and some of your suppliers you can potentially join into co-development, co-innovation, and in the sustainability space, and do some work together across. Katie? I see a hand.
Quick question for you, coming from a chat. Can you define more on non-conformance?
Non-conformance would probably be, I think that probably the easiest example would be on the quality. If you're buying parts and there's a specification for the parts that you're buying from a supplier, and you have a quality procedure on receiving those parts, and if parts are not up to specs, then you raise non-conformance. And usually in a big corporation, there's a protocol for dealing with non-conformance. Quality team gets involved, gets into investigation, whether and then you make decision whether you return the product or there's some other ways to alleviate the non-conformance. Hopefully that's a good example. All right. Thank you, Katie. All right. So I've explained, why we need it. I showed you what happens if you don't do it properly, and I showed you the value. And now I'm going to go through a number of these elements, a little bit more detail. So we'll start with the SRM. And I have definition here from ASCM Supply Chain Dictionary. So it's a comprehensive approach to managing enterprise interaction with the organization that supply goods or services to enterprise users. So in my early example, I've gave reference to the personal relationship, with potential vendors you have in your personal life. So SRM is really designed here for your enterprise to enterprise, which is, multi-level interaction. So the goal of SRM is to streamline and make more effective process between the two enterprises, or between the enterprise and its suppliers. And again, summary points, it's a structure approach. It's not about just managing a transaction. It involves a relationship, data analysis, business alignment, and it goes across multiple disciplines. The question earlier was just to talk about quality. And then, we'll talk more about the risk, sustainability, obviously finance. Everything comes back to finance, operations, and legal. Moving on, so from SRM, again, supplier relationship management. Now it's SPM, supplier performance management, and hopefully, when I get through this slide, you'll have a clear difference between the two. So it's again from ASCM Supply Chain Dictionary. It's the practice of evaluating, monitoring, and managing supplier performance. And the idea is you want to reduce costs, you manage risk, and drive ongoing improvement. Again, so if SRM is focused on a strategic approach on a small number of suppliers and high impact suppliers, and we'll talk later when we talk about governance and segmentation, we'll talk about where the relationship management applies and where the performance management applies. And so on the bottom here, the performance management, so it's a broader scope across all active supplier. And I'll give you an example in my latest role. When we develop a dashboard to track the supplier performance, with the KPIs, it's, dashboard lives on the cloud. It gets the data from ERM, from ERPs. That dashboard is applicable to all suppliers, to the extent that the data is relevant to those particular suppliers. So yeah, metric scorecard, and so that is supplier performance management, and both, and you can embark on both. There's slight difference between the two, and comes back into, what are you really going after, and how much resources do you want to spend on either of the topics. All right, so let's before we jump into some of the execution elements, so let's go through a life cycle. And I'm sure we have some ASCM instructors here on the audience, so I'm sure you guys have some of your vision on this as well. Many times the supplier life cycle is presented in a circle. For me, sometimes it's linear, but this is the view I'm showing today. So we'll start with I'm going to come back to make or buy decision, right? So you made a decision to buy, and you have a certain need, and you have found a supplier that can fill that particular need. So you start with segmentation, based on your need, which is related to, spend, criticality, and risk. You define the segmentation for supplier. What is the objective? This is, you really want to look at the scope. and defining the supplier strategy and what purpose supplier will serve, and really focus on those objectives and the KPIs. And if it's a new supplier, you want to make sure the qualification onboarding is done properly. So the capacity check, capability check, any other documentation requirements needs to be addressed at this step. Then performance monitoring, again, similar to the value slide. So we're moving on to suppliers there, suppliers delivering, suppliers is, responding to our phone calls or whether it's an electronic transaction. And you really want to focus on how they're delivering and what KPIs, and are those KPIs managed in the contract or just the ad hoc. Risk management. I mentioned earlier, so risk management is really, if you think about some of the elements, it's spread across the whole value chain of supplier management. And there's elements of risk management when you're doing onboarding and qualification. That is the initial risk management. But once supplier is in, the situation changes. And you need to perform ongoing risk management. And we'll talk about that. I have a slide on that later. Development collaboration. So if you have a supplier that's underperforming against those KPIs, and I'm sure you'll have several of them, so you want to pay attention to that. Focus your resources on closing the gaps. And if supplier is not capable of closing the gaps, potentially you need to find an alternative supplier. And if a supplier is performing well, maybe that gives the idea that the supplier could really fit in adjacent part of the business. Maybe there's this is through the relationship building, knowing what supplier is capable of, you can potentially expand their scope into other areas, or you can even develop completely new scope for them or with them together. And that would really go deep into collaboration mode. So a life cycle overview. So I'm going to start here on execution and maybe just check if there's any questions. Check on time. All right, we have comments here from Karen. We have a tier ranking based on performance. Yeah, so that's a good point. That's a good point. I think it'd be very relevant point in a couple of slides when I got to the performance management. And when I was putting this presentation together, there's quite a lot of elements to capture. So I think it's definitely a good point relevant to the supply performance management. So a little bit more details, qualification and onboarding. While you guys listening, I have this self-reflection corner here on the bottom left. Some of you I did hear you're retired, so maybe not super relevant right now. But how, if you remember your last corporation that you work on, how fast was your onboarding process? What is reasonable? And how do you balance due diligence with being fast and agile and bring supplier relative to the business needs? I think that's one of the strategic questions when procurement designs qualification and onboarding process for their suppliers. Obviously, it needs to be category specific. If you're onboarding high risk land transfer contractor, versus potentially even a lower risk contractor, or somebody that provides you, we talked about earlier, with quality. So if supplier is only delivering product to you, it does not provide the service, obviously the questions would be different. And for me, in the oil field environment, HSC has been priority, whether it's internal operations, whether it's suppliers, and anyone that goes to the field. That's one of the things that have to be checked. So from HSC for field suppliers, technical audits, manufacturers, this is the good time to establish the communication. These are the first opportunity to engage with the suppliers And again, it's at the various levels of the enterprise, from buyer to the sourcing manager to potentially, depending on criticality of suppliers, to even to VP of supply chain. Really depends on your scope. This is where you establish the roles, communication protocols, and you set clear expectation to reduce friction, and you do that going forward, right? So now again, supplier is here. Supplier is supporting us. How do you define meaningful KPIs? So I'm going to give examples. I think close to 10 years ago, I was in logistics, and just to mention, so I was supporting operations where our logistics providers were bringing product, hazmat, non-hazmat, into the oil field operation. So even if you take a non-hazmat, proppant is for those familiar, fracturing or stimulation is when you bring high porosity proppant and you pump it down the well to increase your oil and gas flow. So that's logistics in North America is quite exciting for that. There are some projects that would take 60, 70 truckloads a day into one well site. And so when you think about a typical logistics provider, on-time delivery would be something that you would really be measuring, right? And the scope of work that I had back in this role, so 2 hour window was our on-time window, and the truck would show up from anywhere 6 to 12 hour notice, depending how far is the drive. So it's very dynamic, and you have to manage the delivery to make sure you don't run out of the product that operational crew is delivering service to the customer by pumping this proppant down into the formation. But what was interesting, while you're managing the logistics and delivery to the well site, when the driver comes to the well site, first of all, the driver is driving on oil field roads, and not always that driver makes it to the well site without an incident. Then let's say the driver made it to the incident. Now they have to offload the product, and the product is delivered by pneumatic method of conveyance. So they air up the compressor, blow the air, and the sand is moving, or proppant is moving with the air. So how you do the offloading process becomes part of the service as well. And so the KPI specific to these suppliers that we have is, first of all, is logistics related KPI, right, on time delivery. But we also have the quality related KPIs, and we had to manage them on, we standardize across suppliers versus 1,000 shipments, and we would measure number of incidents against the 1,000 shipments. So my point here, your KPI needs to be scope specific. Maybe another example from actually last year, we were looking at service providers, so large service providers. If you are bringing equipment and people to the well site, everything becomes all of a sudden important, right? If you bring in equipment, how reliable is equipment? Where is the maintenance records? If you bring in people, are the people trained? What's their average seniority level? What and then you provide the service. All of a sudden, the service around the KPIs around the service become important. So I hope I gave you a couple examples that are specific, scope specific, and gave you ability, to connect with what you're doing today, and really ask yourself is, do you have the specific scorecard for your suppliers? Establishing them, it's a step one. You can improve when you're not measuring. So I think that would be key for this element. All right. Checking, there's no comments here. How would you suggest implementing scorecard? So implementation of any new elements comes with change management, right? And with change management, there's a number of frameworks. So I think, and even implementing supplier management, I have a slide later, how do you implement supplier management? It comes with, you would need to know why you're doing it. You would probably need to have some management support to implement it. And then you bring the relevant stakeholders together and develop an initial version of the scorecard. And ideally, you want to sit down with your suppliers, whether it's individually or you might want to have a group workshop, and you develop those KPIs together with supplier. That allows them to be sold in on those KPIs as they continue to develop or to deliver service for your organization going forward. And then talking about measuring, so you want to make sure the data is available. Are you relying on your data from your side? Is it from supplier side? So there's quite a few elements that comes into establishing the scorecard, so that needs to be addressed, especially when you get into potentially bonus malus scheme around the KPIs. Then you definitely want to make sure that your data is reliable and can be used to either pay a bonus or potentially raise the claim with the supplier. I appreciate Emmanuel. I appreciate the question. I think they're a good one for this slide. Thank you. All right, supplier development. So definitely, we'll start with definition. So it's a technical financial assistant given to existing or potential supplier to improve the quality and or due date performance. So this one is very relevant to quality performance, those non-conformance events we talked about earlier, and then on-time delivery. Again, this could be many other elements. We just had a deep dive more in the KPIs. So this is where you want to ask yourself, does the supplier have the potential? Can they actually do more? And recently we had a supplier for a year and a half. Supplier has been struggling to improve the performance. At some point you would ask yourself, enough is enough. How long would they really be able to do it? Or you need to find an alternative, find a different supplier. You can help them. You can do that together with them. You do a joint Kaizen event, Six Sigma project, Lean training. If you have the technical expertise, this is the best way to get involved. It will only cost the time of your people to get engaged and travel to supplier side and maybe bring them in house and train them. This is how you improve together. Supplier improves their performance, but it's their important performance for you, for your organization. Doing all of that strengthens the relationship, builds some loyalty. And whether you're in a crunch for capacity, whether you want to be on the top call for receiving, if supplier develops some new ideas, new products, and they want to test their products, maybe you want to be that customer who received that phone call. Also, the last but not least, the industry certification. If I mention ISO, there's so many different certification on ASCM as well. You can help coach and teach and support your supplier to receive their certification. And by them going through the process and maintaining their certification, the quality of their service and product will improve. And so the results that you will see on your end. All right. And believe me, these are organized. So I know I'm switching, from one topic to another, but it is the scope of supplier management. So next one is supplier risk management. But before we get into supplier risk management, I want to make sure I separate the two. One is supply chain risk versus the supplier risk. I have this little picture here with the supplier as a node of the network, and supply chains were probably developed back years ago when chain was probably more relevant. But network, I think, in the last few years, network comes out as a more prominent name to describe what are we actually doing in the supply chain. So supply chain risk will include a lot of the internal risk, whether it's, the org structure, the people that you have in the system, your network, your warehouse network, your operational sites. All of that is the supply chain risk. But when we talk about supplier risk, it's specific to a supplier, which is node, an external node from your network. So for supplier risk management, I would like to highlight 6 the categories and there's many more, and it really depends how your organization like to organize and classify them. But 6 that I think are very distinguished and valuable to highlight is first one is financial. There are some providers on the market, and they making a claim that the financial risk is the first one to see from the supplier, and if you see the finance struggles, usually that's the first sign that they're going to have a risk exposure in different areas of their operations. Then you have the operational risk, geographic risk, geopolitical risk, cyber and ESG. Those are the risks are very relevant, and there's more and more topics and articles across different supply chain publication on those topics. But not all the risks are created equal, and really depends on the scope and the impact. So the second step, what you want to do is you want to evaluate and prioritize the risk based on impact, likelihood. There's different matrices, scoring tools that are available, and really, we can have a separate session just on a risk management if anyone interested. Then based on the risk, then you on those priorities you select, what do you want to do with the risk? You want to mitigate the risk, or maybe you want to accept the risk. And some of the best and strategy that I believe for mitigation the supplier or individual supplier risk is to have a dual sourcing or multi-sourcing. You can spend hours and hundreds and thousands of dollars diving deep and try to be proactive in a particular supplier, and you should probably do that if you have a single or sole source supplier. But the amount of effort it would take to do a dual sourcing, you will help alleviate that risk with the particular individual supplier. And there's other ways, buffer inventory, establishing SLAs, performing audits, and business insurance, and asking supplier to have their business insurance, and other elements. And monitor real time where possible. There is plenty of providers that utilize AI and provide the risk score, back to you, and how do you utilize those particular scores or real-time alerts? It becomes part of risk management exercise, and really it's depending on impact and potential impact to your organization, you want to adjust the effort and the cost that you dedicating to risk management program adequate to the potential impact. And when you know the impact, your budget, then you can really focus on what are specific things you can allow yourself within the budget allocated to do here. I think I have questions here. So how do you suggest discussing tariffs and approach for a successful mutual outcome? Well, this is a tricky question. Katie and I had a pleasure listening to Douglas with the ASCM and the what's happening around the tariff, and it's a difficult question to answer. Again, if you have a single source supplier in China that is facing, or back in the day was facing, a very high tariff risk, there's not a lot you can do. But what you can do now, there's a number of elements, for your organization that you can do. That some elements includes, diversifying, nearshoring. Then, sorry, I was
I'm very sweat.
Let someone come off. off mute. Contracts and governments. A busy slide, and quite a lot of elements here. So I'm going to go through this briefly. Contracts are important. If you don't do this properly, you are relying on the relationship. Your relationship are built between the people within the organization, and people move. People change. So someone else comes in, might not fit into existing relationship, will change the particular strategy, the view, and all of a sudden, whether it's a supplier or your organization that were relying on particular product and services, if you don't have the contract to document what you've been doing together, you're potentially at risk. And contract does encompass everything together, and that's the idea. It should have a legal clauses. It should have written the insurance requirements. It should have the KPIs, potentially the bonus malus. Everything should be organized, and the best contracts are discussed, in a room with the handshake, but then written as they are as the company is doing business. There's a little bit elements, for the organization. If we think about not just individual contract with one supplier, but we think about the whole CLMP process, it does require more than just getting one contract right. Now all of a sudden, if you expand that across hundreds and thousands of suppliers that you have, now the question is, it takes time to write them. Who negotiates, who provides this, support and services, where do you do the record keeping? There's significant improvement. Again, technology makes it this part of the business significantly easier. If you adopt the technology, there's AI solutions out there that enable you to search faster, negotiate faster, and really, when I say search, and if I expand on that topic, you can have a whole library of your contracts that are digitized with the flags, with the metrics. What kind of KPIs is there? Is the supplier performing against the KPI? Does the contract have a rebate? What's the trigger for the rebate? And if the trigger happened, what's the dollar value associated with the rebate? When I can request and collect it. All of this becomes a part of the governance. And this topic is really about it's the intersection between legal and the procurement or supply chain. And I've seen it various, even in the two large organizations, the major competitor to each other, I've seen this done differently. So it's really depending on what you have, depending on your company, and again, it's investment in technology and the people versus the value that you believe that comes from doing a proper contract management. It's relevant for supplier management because that group of individuals, managing the supplier relationship, they're the one that dealing with contracts. So I really wanted to include that slide, and I think the answer would be yes, that we can share the slides after the presentation as well. So let me speed up a little bit. I want to make sure there's a little bit of time left for some questions. So supplier innovation program, this is where, technology changes, market condition changes, your competitors pushing you to become more innovative. And there's different ways to do it, whether it's you can do innovation internally, or if you utilize, hundreds of thousands of suppliers that you have, and if you maintain the relationship with them well, there's opportunity to use their ideas, their knowledge to help you. And this is where you can formalize a supplier innovation program and try to address. So I have this Gartner picture here from 2022. It's getting a little bit old, maybe inflation. I would think inflation is going to be a little bit more relevant now. But those are the things that supplier innovation can address, from supplier shortages, from some of the weaknesses and risk management exposed by COVID. So logistics challenges that, every year we keep getting a new logistic challenge, it seems. And then inflation that I mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna move on again for the sake of time, but if there's any questions and someone is interested in supplier innovation program, I'll be happy to have that engagement later. Last but not least in the series of the execution slides is the sustainability. So there's rising expectations across the stakeholders. There's only a planet, right? There's only one planet. We all share it, whether we compete on the market or we live with each other, in one neighborhood. And the expectations are rising from the general populations, from the investors, and from the governments as well. And due diligence is key to onboarding the suppliers, but it also highlights the need for the future as well. And I'll share one example without getting into the scope 3, which is again a very exciting topic for me, and I've been speaking on that in the past. But I will share one actually example from a labor practices. For those who worked or are working in procurement, we had one of the companies have received a 30% reduction from a supplier on pricing, and that happened around COVID time. Things were falling apart, and that company is in oil and gas. Oil was negative at some point, so you can imagine the pressure the procurement team has been getting. So the letters were sent out to suppliers asking, for double-digit reductions. So and like I said, the company receives 25-30% price reduction for a particular vendor, and procurement is cheering, clapping. Wow, what a great reduction. Well, what turns out, this company actually start paying their employees less and only start paying them for half of the time they work. That put effective rate into below the minimum that this particular country, is that you have to pay that minimum wage in the country, and all of a sudden that picture becomes completely different. If you really think about the 25% reduction on the pricing, where does it come from? Was the supplier really making, stamping gold, making gold stamps of the business with you, or are they now subsidizing your business? So those are the questions that we should ask. And labor practices, when you think about labor practices and profitability of your suppliers, those are the questions that become very relevant to this topic. All right, so that brings me to the last section here. So there's a couple things I want to mention. So the maturity model, and I don't know how many people are familiar. So ASCM has 5 levels of supply chain maturity, and it comes from a reactive supply chain where you're kind of a little bit dysfunctional. Everyone is, running around and putting fires down. Going through, you're still reactive in level 2, but you're a little bit more. You have the functional knowledge, you have some expertise. It gets you to level 3. You start thinking across the departments. Materials is talking to procurement, talking with logistics. You're a little bit more integrated enterprise. When you start involving your suppliers, your customers, engaging that, you become an extended enterprise. And there's a level 5 of orchestrated when you enhance, bring technology into that conversation. So they're similar. If you think about supplier management maturity, you can start ad hoc with reactive firefighting, no structure, no people assigned to it. And going through, you can have a structure program, you define processes, defining KPIs, and you can fully have integrated supplier management in the strategy. And moving on to the next topic. This one is probably one of the key. That's why I put it towards the end. How do you segregate the suppliers, right? So we talk about hundreds of thousands of suppliers, depending on how large your organization is, and you cannot be a friend to all of your suppliers. So I'm going to refer to the bottom left the pyramid, that's the one that I used in, in the two organizations I was part of, is how do you separate, priority 1 suppliers, priority 2 suppliers, and everyone else become transactional. So if I want to simplify a little bit, so going back to the performance management and SRM, the relationship management. So you want to try to adjust and focus your relationship towards that priority 1 suppliers, because those are the most, strategic to your business. Performance management, you can do it at a broader scope and focus on priority 1 and priority 2 suppliers, and like I said, have a little bit broader scope. All right, so I'm watching the time. I'm gonna switch through a couple slides, and you guys will have those. I have a slide here that comes a little bit on the RACI, so who's responsible for what, and how supplier management is different from sourcing and from category management. So you guys will have a slide on that. There's also, who owns the supplier management, and I've seen this done at the global level. I've seen it done at the local level. It really depends on the organization, the appetite to invest into particular, elements of procurement. And main thing to highlight here again, to me, RACI is the most important. If you have a sourcing people, if you have a supplier management dedicating, who does what, needs to be clear, needs to be documented, people needs to be trained, and how do they work around day to day, those elements is going to be key. I'm going to skip that one. So focusing, I got a couple slides here left. So when you think about launching supplier management, you want to focus on leadership engagement first. The program takes, there's a dedicated people, systems that potentially support what they do. So it's investment, and the investment comes in with the leadership alignment, and you need to have a sponsor. They usually, in any change, there's internal resistance. And so you need to overcome the change with the support of your sponsor, with understanding, building the picture, building the roadmap for the future. Then the people that you're going to put in place, you need to train. You need to put tools in place and principles, and support them on their journey. And as you engage, go through early steps, you need to make sure those value creation elements are shared across the organization, the stories, starting with quick wins and bigger wins to support the rollout of the program. Reflection point here. So for those that not familiar, ASCM vision is a better world through supply chain. So does your department, does your company have a vision or mission? So when I was part of the supplier management community in both organizations, the vision that, company had was something around being customer of choice. And again, you cannot be friends with all of your suppliers, but being a customer of choice for your top strategic suppliers is probably a mission and a vision that you want to have for your supplier management organization. And it enables, building a trust, building the relationship with suppliers going forward. And it will allow you to be on that list, on that short list of good customers that will receive a phone call, for extra capacity, for new innovation, and some other benefits, right? All right, so that brings me to a summary. I'm gonna list, so on the right side, you will see all the values that supplier management brings, and the little star here is highlight things that we've discussed today. I'm not gonna go over them, but there's other elements that also exist. We didn't go into details on non-conformance or capacity. I think we spent, good amount of time to go over everything. I hope I was able to paint the picture, from why supply chain matters, share with you some of the key concepts and the difference between SRM and SPM, share the tools, and really give the idea if you are to implement the program, or if you have one now, and if you want to scale it up, you know, what you can do, you know, how do you focus, and like anything, it's, you know, what is the investment that you're doing versus the return you're expecting. So that always needs to be kept in mind. And, you know, and if you are investing time and of your people, there's also a question, you know, if that's what is the best area for your people to invest their time, right? So that brings me to the last slide. So the key takeaways, you know, supplier management is strategic, but it also operational. The key is the procurement maturity. You need to build structure, you know, not just documents. You need to have dedicated people that know their roles, and supported by RACI, and others also need to be explained, you know, what supplier managers are doing. You want to focus, and you give ownership, you know, ownership to that particular team. Ideally, it needs to be done, you know, through the org chart, through the titles, you know, where they have the ownership, they understand their scope of work. And then you establish priorities. There's only so many suppliers you can manage. Even if you know, my best example is, even if you have 10 suppliers and you have all of those elements, you know, from risk management to contract management to performance to collaboration, you know, you have to be able to understand and prioritize, even for yourself, you know, what are your priorities? And then organizationally, you need to establish what are the priority suppliers you should invest in, and your time and effort to. And last comment, you know, don't go alone. This is a journey. This is a journey that many companies are going through. Begin with what you have. I hope I gave you several elements to, you know, to kick it off. But if you need help, you need support, there's experts out there. And if you guys want to help and have a discussion, or have discussion with us, I'll be happy to support. And it's 1 o'clock. All right, Tommy, Johanna, I don't know if I'd like, I mean, I can stay a little bit if people have questions. I know we formally have it till 1 o'clock, but I'm here. If anyone wants to, you know, unmute, have a discussion, I'm going to stay here.
Hey, Dmitry, thank you so much. Echo the couple comments I saw on the completeness and kind of conciseness. Even though it was a lot of slides, it's also a lot of information. So thank you. For those, really quick before, again, Dmitry has agreed to stay if you have questions, but if you need to go because you used your lunch hour, very quick, I can pop in the chat if you need your the code for thank you for attending. Sorry, I'm double hatting because I know some of you need to go. Let me give this to everyone. Okay, so that's the code that you will use if you need it. And then if you need to go, thank you guys all for coming on your lunch. I think that's all that I can think of. Johanna?
No, just a great presentation, Dmitry. Thank you so much for being with us today. Just for everybody, we're going to be sending the survey. Please provide your feedback and ideas for future presentations. Also, and please make sure, since you attended this PDM, to go to the website and log in your credits. So you're going to be receiving credit points for this PDM. So don't forget to do so.
Yep. It'll be any attendance, and then you have to log in. The other thing to note, we'll send out a link to we record all of them and they're on YouTube. We've been working to move them over. We've learned some of the other platforms will delete some of our older ones, which were fantastic. So we'll be sending out a link with the presentation. It takes a little bit to download, but we'll send it out. So thank you guys for attending. If you need to get on with your day, go ahead. And Dmitry, Joanna, I will start working on the recording and you guys can do the end. Sorry.